My unemployed husband stole $50,000 from my laptop to go to Paris with his mistress, but the card he used was a trap from my cybersecurity job, and he got exposed in real time. I'm 34 years old, I work in cybersecurity, and what happened 6 months ago still feels surreal when I think about it. Basically, I discovered that my husband, Trevor, stole my credit card information to go on a trip to Europe with another woman, spending like $50,000 in the process. But here's the good part. I mean, the incredibly ironic part of this whole situation. The idiot didn't know that the card he stole was part of a fraud detection training program we use at my work. He literally walked into the perfect trap without realizing it. But anyway, let me start from the beginning, because this story has layers, you know? I met Trevor like 7 years ago at a coffee shop, one of those casual situations where someone asks if they can share your table because there are no available seats. He was charming. Honestly, very charismatic. Always had interesting stories to tell. He was working in marketing back then, or at least that's what he said. We got married after 2 years of dating, and the first few years were good, I guess. Not perfect, but what marriage is. The thing is that Trevor started having problems with work. First, it was that he got laid off from an agency because there were staff cuts. Then he couldn't find anything stable. And eventually he stopped looking. I was making good money with my cybersecurity job, so at first it didn't bother me that much to support the household alone. I thought it was temporary, that he'd find something soon. But months passed, then a year, and Trevor was still unemployed. But somehow he always had money to go out with his friends or buy himself things. I'd ask him where he got the money, and he always had an excuse, that a friend had lent it to him, that he'd sold something online, you know, those kinds of vague explanations that technically could be true, but deep down, something doesn't add up. The truth is, I was so into my work that I kind of ignored the red flags. You know what I mean? My field is super demanding. I work with fraud detection systems for financial institutions, and I was leading an important project, implementing new monitoring technologies. I was spending like 12 hours a day in front of the computer, analyzing suspicious transaction patterns, designing algorithms to detect fraudulent behavior. It's ironic, isn't it? I spent all day detecting fraud for other people and didn't see the one happening in my own house. But well, that's how things are sometimes. So we get to March of this year, 6 months ago. I was working on a pilot training program where we created dummy accounts with real credit cards but linked to ultra-sensitive monitoring systems. The idea was that any transaction would trigger immediate alerts and we could track everything in real time. It was basically a trap to study fraud patterns without putting real customer money at risk. When we had like 10 of these test accounts, and I kept all the information on my work laptop, card numbers, security codes, everything. Yes, I know. I probably should have protected it better, but I literally lived alone with my husband. Who would think I needed to hide work information in my own house? One night, I think it was like 2 in the morning, I got up to go to the bathroom and saw light in the living room. Trevor was there, sitting with my laptop open. When he saw me, he got super nervous and closed the screen quickly, saying he couldn't sleep and was watching YouTube videos. I was half asleep and didn't think much of it. Just told him to go to bed and went back to sleep. Looking back, that was the moment, That's when it all started. Though I didn't know it until later. Like a week later, Trevor tells me he needs to take a business trip. That an old client from his marketing days had contacted him and they wanted him to go to Europe to discuss a project. I asked him for details, like what company, how much are they paying you, who's covering the trip expenses, and he had answers for everything. Very convincing. He said the company was covering everything, that the project was confidential so he couldn't tell me much, and that if everything went well, it could be his big comeback to the work world. I wanted to believe him, honestly. I wanted to think that finally things were going to get better. So I told him, okay, go. It's a great opportunity. He left on a Friday. He gave me a kiss on the cheek, grabbed his suitcase, and went to the airport. I stayed home working as usual. Everything normal until Saturday afternoon, when I checked my banking app to see how much I had to pay on my personal credit card. And that's when I saw something really weird. I had notifications from an account I didn't even recognize. It was one of the test accounts from work, and there were like 50 transactions in less than 24 hours, all in Paris. Luxury hotels, super expensive restaurants, designer stores like Chanel, Louis Vuitton, places like that, in total. And when I say this, I'm not exaggerating. There were like $50,000 in charges. My first thought was pure panic. I thought someone had hacked our work system and stolen the information from the test accounts. That would have been an absolute disaster for the company, for my career, for everything. But then I started reviewing the transaction details and something didn't add up. The charges matched exactly with the itinerary Trevor had mentioned. A hotel in the 7th district of Paris, which is where he said he was going to stay. Restaurants in the same areas he had casually mentioned when we talked about his trip. And the start date of the transactions was exactly the day he flew. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was literally impossible. And then everything clicked in my head. The night I saw him with my laptop. His nervousness. The vague excuses about the money he always had. The mysterious business trip that appeared out of nowhere. Everything suddenly made sense. And I felt so stupid. So incredibly stupid for not having seen it before. My husband had stolen from me. Not only had he stolen from me, but he had used my own work information to commit fraud and finance a luxury vacation in Europe with another woman, because obviously there was someone else. The charges included 2 plane tickets, 2 hotel rooms booked as a suite, meals for 2 people. It wasn't a business trip. It was a damn romantic vacation paid for with stolen money. I sat on the couch staring at my phone screen probably for an hour. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, throw up, or what. It felt like the floor was opening up beneath me. 7 years together. Married for 5. And this man, who supposedly loved me, had betrayed me in the most elaborate and cruel way possible. But after the initial shock came something different. Anger, yes, but also a strange clarity. Because the thing is that Trevor didn't know, had no idea, that the account he had stolen was connected to our most advanced monitoring systems. Every transaction he made was being tracked in real time. We had his exact location. We could see what he was buying, where he was eating, who he was with. It was like watching someone digging their own grave in slow motion. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. I have a friend, Chloe, who's a divorce attorney, and I called her that same Saturday night. I explained the whole situation to her, and she basically told me this went beyond a simple divorce, that this was federal fraud. She told me I needed to document everything, not to confront Trevor yet, to let him continue without knowing that I already knew. So that's what I did. I saved screenshots of every transaction, downloaded the account activity reports, documented absolutely everything. Monday morning, I called my supervisor at work and explained what was happening. He was in shock, obviously, but also understood the gravity of the situation. We contacted the company's legal department, and they immediately involved federal authorities because this touched multiple jurisdictions and had crossed international borders. An Agent Keller, I think his name was, called me that same day. It was surreal talking to a federal investigator about my husband. He asked me a ton of questions, wanted to know exactly how Trevor had accessed the information, what he knew about my work, if I had noticed anything suspicious before. I told him everything, down to the detail of the night I found him with my laptop. Trevor came back from the trip on a Thursday, like 10 days after he'd left. He arrived at the house with a suitcase full of designer things, expensive gifts, and a smile on his face like he was the king of the world. He brought me a Louis Vuitton bag, because I guess in his twisted mind, that was going to make everything okay. He hugged me and started telling me about the trip, about how amazing Paris had been, about the restaurants where he'd eaten, the places he'd visited. All lies. Well, not lies exactly, because he had been to those places, but the whole business trip narrative was pure fiction. I let him talk. I nodded, smiled, asked the appropriate questions. Inside, I was boiling. But I kept calm because Chloe had told me I needed him to feel confident, to believe he'd gotten away with it. And it worked. Trevor couldn't shut up. He started bragging about the 5-star hotel where he'd stayed, about how he'd had dinner at Michelin-starred restaurants, about the incredible stores where he'd bought clothes, and I recorded everything. I took out my phone, told him I wanted to record his story to send it to my mom, and he happily kept talking, basically confessing everything without realizing it. At one point, I asked him, like casually, "Hey, but how did you pay for all that?" Because I thought the client was only covering the flight and hotel. And he was quiet for a second, probably thinking about what lie he was going to tell, and then he smiled and said the Client had been very generous, that they'd given him a corporate card for expenses. Lie after lie after lie. And I just nodded, waiting. Agent Keller had told me they had enough evidence to arrest Trevor, but they wanted to wait until he returned to the country to do it on US soil. So, Friday morning, one day after Trevor arrived, there was a knock on the door. I knew who they were. Trevor didn't. He opened the door with a coffee cup in his hand, relaxed, carefree, and there were 2 police officers and Agent Keller with an arrest warrant. You know that scene in movies where someone is in total shock and drops everything they're holding? That's how it was. The cup smashed on the floor, coffee spilled everywhere, and Trevor stood there with his mouth open while Agent Keller read him his rights. He tried to run, which was pathetic and ridiculous because where was he going to go? They stopped him before he reached the end of the hallway. I stood in the apartment doorway watching everything, and I'm not going to lie, I felt enormous satisfaction. It was like seeing years of lies and manipulation finally catch up with him. They took him away in handcuffs. As they went down the stairs, he was yelling at me to help him, to call a lawyer, that this was a misunderstanding, as if he'd accidentally stolen $50,000 and gone on vacation to Paris. I didn't say anything. I just closed the door and sat on the couch, in the same place where I'd been when I discovered everything, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I allowed myself to cry. I wasn't crying for him, or for the marriage, but for all the wasted time, for the version of me who had been naive enough not to see who this man really was. They interrogated him for hours that day. Chloe kept me informed of everything. Apparently, Trevor first tried to deny everything, then tried to blame me, saying I had given him permission to use the card. And when that didn't work, because obviously, there was evidence that he had accessed my laptop without my knowledge, he tried to say he thought the card was mine and that since we were married, he had the right to use it. None of his excuses worked. The evidence was too clear. The building's security cameras showed him entering the apartment that night at 2 a.m. when I found him with my laptop. My computer's logs showed exactly what files he had opened. And I had my recording, where he basically admitted everything. Oh, and Nicole. Yes, because obviously, there was a Nicole. The woman he'd gone to Paris with. The authorities contacted her too as part of the investigation. Turns out she didn't know anything about me. Trevor had told her he was single, that he worked in tech, that he had money. The typical thing. When she found out he was married and that the whole trip had been financed with stolen money, she disappeared. She blocked Trevor everywhere, refused to testify on his behalf, basically left him completely alone. Part of me felt sorry for her because she was also deceived, but honestly, I didn't think much about Nicole. I had enough things in my own head. Trevor eventually accepted a plea deal with the prosecutor's office. He wasn't going to go to prison for long if he accepted full guilt, total restitution of the $50,000 plus interest, and like 300 hours of community service. His lawyer advised him to take the deal, because if he went to trial, he was going to lose, and the sentence would be much worse. So that's what he did. He signed the papers, officially admitted everything, and basically destroyed any possibility of having a decent professional future because now he has a criminal record for fraud. The divorce was relatively quick, considering the circumstances. Chloe handled everything brilliantly. We didn't have kids, thank God. And we didn't have many shared assets. Because technically, I had paid for everything for the last few years. Trevor tried to fight for some money, saying he was entitled to part of my savings, but his lawyer basically told him to shut up because any judge was going to laugh at that petition, considering he'd just been convicted of stealing from me. The papers were finalized in like 3 months. World record, probably. I haven't seen Trevor since the day of the arrest. I know from Chloe that he's living with his mother now, working some part-time job to pay the restitution. I have no desire to see him or know how he's doing. That part of my life is closed, finished, filed in a mental folder that says mistakes of the past. The company where I work was incredibly understanding about the whole situation. In fact, my supervisor told me that the way I handled everything demonstrated exactly why I'm good at what I do. We used Trevor's case as an internal study of how our detection systems work even in unanticipated situations. It's kind of ironic to turn your own personal trauma into work training material, but well, at least something good came out of all this. Now, 6 months later, I'm okay. I mean, I'm better than okay, honestly. I live alone in the same apartment. I completely redecorated it because I didn't want anything that reminded me of Trevor. My friend Lauren helped me paint the walls. We changed the furniture, basically erased any trace of him. It's my space now, completely mine. And there's something liberating about that, you know? Knowing that every decision I make, everything I buy, every plan I make, is just mine. I don't have to consult with anyone. I don't have to worry about whether someone is lying or using my money without permission. I've gone out a couple of times with friends. Nothing serious, just remembering what it's like to have a social life without the burden of a toxic marriage. Lauren drags me to events constantly, says I need to get out more, meet new people. And maybe she's right. For now, I'm focused on my work, on rebuilding trust in my own judgment, on processing everything that happened. Therapy helps a lot. I started going like a month after the divorce because I realized I had a bunch of things to work on. Not just about Trevor, but about why I allowed the situation to go so far. Why I ignored so many red flags. There are days when I still get angry. It makes me angry to have lost 7 years with someone who turned out to be a liar and a thief. It makes me angry to have been so trusting, so naive. But there are also days when I feel grateful, strangely grateful, that all this happened. Because it showed me what I'm made of. You know what I mean? It showed me that I can handle crisis situations, that I can be strategic and strong even when my world is falling apart. And it showed me that I deserve much more than what I was getting. Last week, I was organizing some old documents and found a photo from our wedding. Trevor and I smiling, looking so happy, so in love. I looked at it for a long moment, trying to remember what I felt that day, if there was any sign that things would end like this. And honestly, there isn't. Or maybe there is and I didn't see it. But it doesn't matter now. I ripped up the photo, threw it in the trash, and went on with my day. Because that's what it is now. An old photo. A memory of something that no longer exists. Of someone I no longer am. I guess if there's anything I learned from all this, it's that people can surprise you, for better or worse. Trevor surprised me in the worst way possible. But I also discovered that I have incredible friends like Lauren and Chloe, who were there for me every step of the way. And I discovered that I'm stronger than I thought. That I can rebuild my life from scratch if necessary. That I don't need anyone to complete me or give me value. I already have that on my own. So yeah, my husband stole $50,000 from me, went to Paris with another woman, and ended up arrested thanks to my cybersecurity work. It's a crazy story, I know, but it's my story. And for the first time in a long time, I'm proud of how I handled it, of the decisions I made, of the person I'm becoming after all this. Things are good now. Not perfect, but good. And that's enough for now, I guess.